Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. And today is Friday, the 27th of January. My name is Brian Liddy, and I'm really pleased to be able to say that tonight we have with us Linda Fabiani as our guest. Hello, Linda. How are you this evening?
All good here. Thank you very much, Brian.
It's great to have you. Thanks for taking time to join us. So,
Pleasure.
thank you. Oh, you ought to use. Okay, so I'll start with today's Ukraine update, day 338. Ukraine's army claims to have killed 109 Russian soldiers and wounded a further 188 in one day during fighting around the village of Vuhledar in the eastern Donetsk Oblast. Poland will send an additional 60 tanks, including 30 PT-9S-1s to Ukraine, on top of the 14 German-made Leopard 2 tanks it has already pledged. Belgian Prime Minister Alexander De Croo has announced a package of an additional €93.6 million, that's £84 million, in military aid for Ukraine. Apologies. Ukraine's state broadcaster reported that 10 regions of Ukraine are using emergency power outages due to a power shortage in the network after Thursday's Russian attacks. The Kremlin has said that President Biden had the key to end the conflict in Ukraine by directing Kyiv to settle, but that Washington had so far not been willing to use it. Ukrainian government officials who shirk their duties during wartime will be quickly removed, a top aide to President Zelensky has said. Russia is violating the fundamental principles of child protection in wartime by giving Ukrainian children Russian passports and putting them up for adoption, the UN's refugee agency chief Filippo Grandi has said. A 74-year-old Spanish man arrested over a spate of letter bombs sent to institutions, including the Prime Minister's office and the Ukrainian embassy in Madrid in late 2022, was trying to pressure Spain to drop its support for Ukraine, according to the investigating magistrate. The man was remanded in custody as he was considered a flight risk to Russia. TASS is reporting that the occupied Ukrainian regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson are to be ordered to use Moscow time instead of Kyiv time. Hungary will veto any European Union sanctions against Russia affecting nuclear energy, the Prime Minister Viktor Orban told State Radio today. Ukraine would not rule out boycotting the Olympic Games if Russian and Belarusian athletes are allowed to compete in the Paris 2024 Games, its sports minister said. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has reiterated Australian support for Ukraine and criticised supporters of Russia's invasion after a video emerged showing Novak Djokovic's father posing at the Australian Open with fans holding Russian flags. Russia's communications regulator, Roskomnadzor, said it has blocked the websites of the CIA and FBI, accusing the two US government agencies of spreading false information. So that was today's update. Linda, was there anything on there that
Yeah.
maybe caught your mind or caught your eye?
Uh, well, the report from the UN Refugee Agency, that you said, Brian, where they're giving they're giving Ukrainian children Russian passports and having them forcibly adopted. I mean, that's something that happens in conflicts over the world where you have one nation and its regime who wants to take over another nation, and it's part of what they do. They try to eradicate the culture. They try to assimilate young people into their way of thinking, and it's brutal, absolutely brutal, because you're talking about doing away with, as I say, a whole culture. It's about language. It's about everything. So it's a horrible, horrible thing that gets done by oppressive regimes. Remember, right across Europe at one time, Roma children were taken away from their parents and forcibly adopted. We know in British history, when you look at the settlement of the New World, this was done to Indigenous peoples as well. So I find it really quite depressing when you hear something like that and you think, have we learned nothing? Has the world learned nothing? We keep saying things like, this should never happen again, lest we forget. And then we hear the same old tactics being used by nations that should, in fact, know better because they suffered it themselves very often.
Yeah, and taking in
And
and combining that with the item that about changing the clock times, so that I mean that's real gaslighting of an entire nation almost, isn't it? Really, it's as you said,
absolutely.
cultural change on a huge scale.
Yeah. And I'm also finding it really difficult. This thing about, oh, Ukraine should settle, Ukraine should settle. You're hearing that from quite a few places now. And you have to turn that back and folk and say, well, would you? You know,
Mm,
it's up to the Ukrainian people how they deal with this.
yeah.
It's not anybody else to be telling them what they do, especially when so often the motivation for others wanting things settled isn't about the greater good, it's financial. And I find that very sad too.
Yes, I suspect you're probably right there. So I'll
Uh,
move on to the first item this evening. The First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has chaired another resilience meeting this morning as part of the ongoing efforts to help lead health and social care out of the toughest winter in its history. This is the fourth time the Scottish Government Resilience Room, the SGORR, has gathered to discuss the scale of the challenges and find solutions. The First Minister heard updates on hospital capacity, actions to alleviate delayed discharge, and the rates of respiratory illness. Statistics published this week have shown a continued improvement in A&E performance, although hospital occupancy levels remain high. She was joined by the Deputy First Minister, the Health Secretary, and the other Cabinet Ministers, along with the Chief Medical Officer and senior representatives from NHS boards, COSLA, Integration Joint Boards, and the Scottish Ambulance Service. The First Minister said, "It is encouraging to see A&E waiting times are reducing and long waits in emergency departments dropping, but significant challenges remain. We're pulling every lever at our disposal to get us through this winter. Above all, I want to thank the incredible efforts of the staff right across the health and social care system for their commitment and hard work during this extremely challenging winter." So, Linda, um,
mm,
I'm just thinking about Rishi Sunak and his Cobra meetings. I tried to find out if he's had a Cobra meeting online just before I came in. It
mm.
doesn't look as if he had. I couldn't find any reports of
No, I
Sunak
haven't seen
having
anything.
a Cobra meeting. He's about to have a cabinet away day, though.
Was
But
it? Oh, that's
yes, at
very good.
Checkers, but
Wonderful.
not
All right.
but not to discuss problems with the NHS. It's to find out um, how to restore faith in the party by the public. Um,
Oh, really? Oh, well,
yes,
that's obviously
so
more important to them.
yes,
I'll tell you,
clearly.
that's one thing. That's one thing about Nicola Sturgeon. Folks can say what they like about Nicola Sturgeon, but she accepts responsibility and she goes at the head of dealing with things. Um, to the point, sometimes I suspect her cabinet secretaries might think, "Going to let me go on with it," but she takes it on, and I think she's doing absolutely the right thing by having these meetings and involving everyone. It was quite. I'm glad to see that the accident emergency waiting times and things are reducing. But there are still huge big issues there. You mentioned, Brian, the occupancy rates in the hospital, but there's also the fact that there's health boards who have stopped elective surgery. That's a concern for people, um, and that's about the occupancy rates in the hospital and the people that are getting admitted with respiratory illnesses and things. But it's also about the bed blocking and not people not being able to get out of hospital when they should be because of the lack of home care and things. So it's still difficult. This has been going on for decades, in fact. I can't remember a time of being involved in public life when this hasn't been the case. So it's certainly not a new thing. And at least Nicola Sturgeon's government has admitted it. They're trying to deal with it. They've combined the health and social care. They're looking at solutions, but there's a long way to go with that yet. So I'm hoping there's a lot of emphasis in that because, yes, we're at crisis point now. Of course we are. We've seen that with everything that's going on. But we should never get complacent again. So anything we're learning through this, anything that's been done to stop this situation should be built upon for the future. So I'm hoping, well, I'm more than hoping, I think Nicola Sturgeon's got a handle on this, as has our Health Secretary and the others. And they're going through it. I'm glad they're spreading the discussions as widely as they are from the participants that you mentioned there, Brian, because very often these are people that know what's best, but you have to take care as well that there's those in the front line are also included in these discussions. Because sometimes those that are sitting higher up the ladder at the big desks and everything don't really have a handle on some of the simple solutions that would help in many, many cases. So there's big issues there, but there's also smaller things that could be done. So talking to everybody with experience is the main way forward.
So, Linda, in your time as an MSP in Holyrood, did you ever take part in a resilience committee meeting?
No, I didn't. I'm
No.
afraid I was
Oh,
I was never a cabinet secretary. I was a lowly minister.
okay. I was
I
kind of hoping you'd be able to tell us what they're like.
do you know, I've actually sat in the room while some of the discussions about them have taken place. Um, it's just people genuinely wanting to understand and working together to get solutions. You know, it's usually at times of crisis that resilience meetings are called. You've got to know what's going on, got to be on the ball, and those with direct responsibility. Of course, we have seen in the past issues when ministers, whether it be in Scotland, whether it be in the rest of the UK, haven't really been on top of the brief, haven't really known what's been going on. You can't have that. That's what the resilience meetings are about.
Yeah, be interesting to see what the outcome is then. So I'll move on to the next item. So Jeremy Hunt has signalled tax cuts will only come when the time is right and be matched by spending restraint as he seeks to temper restive Conservative backbenchers' expectations ahead of the budget in March. The Chancellor said he hoped to inject what he described as much needed optimism about the country's future, saying he wanted the UK to have nothing less than the most competitive tax regime of any major country. He declined to comment on his own tax affairs when asked if he had ever had to pay a penalty to HMRC after the Tory chair, Nadeem Zahawi, was reported to have done so. In a speech at Bloomberg, designed to set out ambitions for achieving Rishi Sunak's pledge to grow the economy, Hunt targeted economic inactivity and urged those who retired early after the COVID pandemic or struggled to find a new job after the furlough scheme ended to rejoin the workforce. Hunt blamed UK's woes on economic headwinds that affected many countries, citing favourable growth statistics and inflation remaining higher in 14 European Union countries. Declinism about Britain is just wrong, he said. Commenting on Jeremy Hunt's speech, SNP economy spokesperson Stuart Hosey MP said, "Neither the Tories nor the pro-Brexit Labour Party are being honest with voters about the biggest cause of long-term damage to the UK economy and cost of living. Brexit has cost the UK billions and hammered trade, growth and household incomes. With Jeremy Hunt and Keir Starmer ruling out any return to the EU or single market, independence is the only way for Scotland to regain our place in Europe and build a stronger, more prosperous economy." So, Linda, I haven't been able to watch all of Hunt's speech or presentation, but I've been looking at clips and listening to sound bites. So he was trying to make out that Brexit is a good thing and is going to help us solve any problems that we have. So because he was going to pitch it that way, he listed problems that Britain is facing, which said he went back to the financial crisis of 2008, the pandemic, and now the international energy crisis, but he couldn't put Brexit in amongst them. And he's come up with 4 E's called
All right.
Yes. So we've had Sunak's three words, professionalism, accountability, integrity, and Sunak's 5 aims.
Mm,
Now we've got Hunt's four
right.
E's. They're enterprise, education, employment, and everywhere. So when I read that, I was going, what's everywhere? There's some, there is one thing that I was thinking is everywhere, and you can smell it in English rivers. I'm probably being a bit close to the.
Oh, Brian.
So I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you're eating your tea or having your dinner. I apologise, but Hunt was a Remainer. Sorry, I'm talking too much here. And he talked about nimbleness and flexibilities that he wants because of Brexit. But haven't we lost nimbleness and flexibility
Absolutely.
because I mean, just one example is freedom of movement. So I'll be quiet now and find out what you have to say.
I mean, I have to say, first of all, Brian, well done for actually watching clips, because I don't watch clips of them anymore. I just get angry when I watch them because it's the complacency of them. You know, uh, they are just so disingenuous. They just say things that they think will make them popular and get them re-elected, which is what they're aiming at. Um, and the honesty just isn't there. And it's the language that's used, all these buzzwords. You've just said the four E's. I'm sure if we sat and thought about it, we could come up with four more appropriate E's. Egypt, perhaps, but there. But they make up words as well. Or maybe it's just me. Maybe I've just never come across some of the words. Declinism? What the heck's declinism? You know, they talk a different language. And it's just awful. I was really concerned about a few of the things that were said. First of all, this picking out, this cherry picking, saying, oh, there's other countries with inflation that's a bit higher. That's not the mark of a success or failure, just the inflation. It has to be looked at in the round with the other things that are happening as well. The fact that he's going on about we want nothing less than the most competitive tax regime. They're still in this cloud cuckoo land that says Britain is going to be great on its own. And, you know, here we are again. Great Britain is appalling, absolutely appalling. We're isolated. Freedom of movement is really damaging so much. You know, Brexit is the elephant in the room that they just never talk about. It's had an appalling effect. They don't want to know. Then there's the other thing. They've always got to be. They're going to be best in the world at this. I see that he was talking about high tech again. We're going to be the world's leading market in high tech. I feel as if I've heard that before. They've always got something to be saying, but there's nothing really concrete there. Now, when you look at, for example, Scotland, I mean, the backbone of Scotland's economy, you know, aside from our major exports, are small businesses. He's offering nothing for small businesses to really help them face the challenges that Brexit has brought, facing coming out of the pandemic and building up again. It's all rhetoric, and some of it is rhetoric that just doesn't make any sense. So I think I can't remember who you said, was it Stuart Hosey was talking about this, and he's absolutely right. We're on a downward spiral with this lot. We're 3 years, down the road from Brexit. I think the anniversary is next week, and they're still spouting the same rubbish.
Yeah, it's
They've
true,
never
and
admitted that
yeah,
there's problems,
it,
And
it,
how about stop talking about, all this wonderful economic miracle and how we're going to have this huge growth rate and how taxes are going to be so low? How about starting talking about, to use the phrase that's used now, well-being? How about making sure you have people that are healthy, have a decent roof over their head, and are able to eat and keep themselves warm? You
yeah,
never hear them talking about.
yeah. It is worth checking out some of the clips because he does have an incredible brass neck, if I can use that expression. It's like
Yeah.
he says these things, and yet when you listen to what he's saying, and you think or you remember that Britain voted to impose trade tariffs on itself by choice. The first time any country's ever done that in history. And then little
Mhm.
facts like car production is at its lowest in the UK that it's ever been for
Huh?
60 years. And it's because of
Mhm.
Brexit. But we're getting behind time, so I better move on. Thanks, Linda. Bankers' pay has risen more than 3 times as fast as nurses' pay since the 2008 financial crisis, according to an analysis by the TUC, which said low-paid nurses are being forced to rely on handouts from food banks. The union's umbrella body said pay and bonuses for those working in the finance and the insurance sector had risen by an average of 6% a year in nominal terms, without taking inflation into account, since 2008 was compared with a rise of less than 2% a year for nurses, midwives and paramedics. On average, nurses in England now earn £32,934 a year, according to the TUC, up from £26,123 in 2008. This compares with an average pay of £80,390 for those employed in the finance and insurance sectors. That's a near doubling of their average 2000 pay of £43,901. Paul Novak, General Secretary of the TUC, said it could not be morally right that nurses are having to use food banks to get by, while bankers are allowed to help themselves to unlimited bumper bonuses. The TUC said the UK government's failure to increase nurses' pay in line with inflation had left them facing a £42,000 loss in real earnings since 2008. That figure is even higher for midwives and paramedics, who are said to be facing an estimated loss of £56,000. The TUC say that health workers in England have been forced to take action to defend their living standards after more than a decade of real terms pay cuts. Health workers in Scotland have received a record high pay deal, which gives an uplift of 11.3% for the lowest paid staff and delivers an average increase of 7.5%. So, Linda, this item took me right back to the pandemic, the middle of the pandemic, when we were told that everybody realised now how important frontline workers were. You know, people like refuse collectors and NHS staff, right down to cleaners and porters. We were told it would be different after the pandemic and that things would change and that bankers
Yeah.
would be kind of downgraded in the new fairer society. So have we been conned?
Yes, I think we've been
Okay.
absolutely conned. I mean, it's not that long ago that, not that long after the pandemic, that the Tory government decided that they would lift the cap on bankers' bonuses, for example. And they look after their own. That's the bottom line. And when you look at the finance and insurance sectors, there was other work carried out by the TUC, and even when you don't look at the huge big top earners, you know, that are getting millions and handing out millions as well to various places, the average bonuses in the finance and insurance sectors were £20,000. Now that means there's some getting loads and there's some getting a lot less, but they're still getting bonuses. And when you consider that the Tories absolutely decimated Scotland's manufacturing sector and used the benefits and profits from Scotland's oil to fund this services sector and the finance and insurance, it's very, very clear that they're all in it together. You know, we hear them saying we're all in this together during the pandemic. They didn't mean that at all. They meant them and their pals. And it becomes clearer and clearer by the day. Whether it's Liz Truss, whether it's Jeremy Hunt, any of them, Rishi Sunak, they have absolutely no intention of making life better for ordinary folks. They're just making sure everything's okay for them and their own sectors. And yes, we've been conned. There was a great hope that things really would change. And I mean, I have to say, I think some of the things that the Tory government did through the pandemic, you know, were quite admirable, you know, in terms of the furlough money and things like that. Although, you know, there's big issues come out after that about how it was used, and then there's issues with the equipment and everything else, and money going to certain people, fast tracking contracts and stuff. But I think there was a bit of a hope that it was a real wake up call for everybody. It hasn't been. It's been certainly. It's been a wake up call for the likes of the nurses that now know how little they really are valued when it
Yeah.
comes to it.
uh, to kind of bring it back up to date, it's interesting to note that in Scotland there haven't yet been any strikes by NHS staff or nurses, whereas
Yeah.
in England there have already been strikes. But
Well, it's the tale of two governments again, isn't it, Brian?
yeah,
I'm certainly not saying things are perfect in Scotland. Of course, they're not. But at least they have a government that's willing to talk,
yes,
willing to have discussion. And I think there is a sort of recognition that actually the Scottish government's doing the best it can to mitigate what the Westminster government's doing, and that things are difficult for the Scottish government as well. I think there's a general recognition of that.
yeah,
But down there, they're just refusing to discuss anything sensibly. And when they do start discussing anything with the trade unions, like so the rail union, for example, they again, I use the word disingenuous again. They tell half a story. They even put out false information at times. So I still think that it's in some Tories' interests to carry this on with the National Health
mm,
Service, the way they're behaving, because there is the ulterior motive, which is privatise some of the services. So how can you, on one hand, have a Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, that's saying he wants a really low tax regime and everything else, and on the other hand, look round and see the mess that is NHS England?
yeah. It's
So,
interesting times. Time's definitely against us, Linda. So I'd better move to the next item. So the number of EU students enrolling in British universities has more than halved since Brexit, with sharp declines in scholars from Italy, Germany, and France, figures reveal. Brexit is seen as a primary deterrent, with home fees and student finance no longer available to EU students who do not already live in the UK with settled or pre-settled status. The significant decrease shown in EU first-year student enrolments can be attributed to changes in fees eligibility, said the Higher Education Statistics Agency, which has published the data for the first full post-Brexit year. In the year 2017-18, the HESA data showed that there were 9,010 students from the EU enrolled in universities in Scotland. That number fell to just 4,515 in 2021-22. Commenting, the SNP's education spokesperson Carol Monaghan MP said, Brexit has been catastrophic for young people across Scotland as their opportunities to work, travel and study in Europe have been severely hindered by the ending of free movement of people. Opportunities to attract the best young talents to Scotland will continue to be hindered under Westminster control. The EU's Erasmus scheme gave our young people fantastic opportunities to study and explore in Europe, and the UK's alternative Turing scheme is a pale imitation of that. So, Linda, that's exactly it, isn't it? Erasmus. And the thing is, we didn't even have to leave the Erasmus scheme. We've opted out of it again by choice. So again,
mhm, mhm,
we're being intentionally isolated, aren't we?
mhm. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. The other side of this headline that the number of EU students has halved. The other side of that is the lack of opportunity for our young people to easily go and study elsewhere in Europe. And again, a deliberate ploy by the Westminster government when they opted out of the Erasmus scheme. They put this other scheme in place, but I've yet to see any real detail either about how it will work or how it is working. There's already a load of young people being severely disadvantaged. So there's ongoing implications for all of this because Scotland has been enriched by EU students coming to live here, by EU residents coming to work here. Whether it be short term or longer term, we've been enriched by that. And it's been taken away from us. Our internationalism is being eroded all the time. And it's that isolationism I find quite heartbreaking, in fact. And you just couple it up with everything else that's been going on with the Tories. And the future within the UK is pretty bleak. Um,
Yeah.
whether it be culturally, socially, or in fact economically, I can't see any benefits at all that have come from Brexit. In fact, when Tories have been asked give us a benefit from Brexit. They haven't been able to answer. So
Yeah,
I think this one's really sad. Yeah.
I sometimes wonder when I do meet people that have come over from the EU or friends that are from North America, for example. I kind of want to ask them, why would you want to stay here? But maybe that's a question for another day. So time
Aye.
is, yeah, yeah. I'll move on to the next item, Linda, if that's okay.
Yeah.
In a post on Instagram, Alan Cummings has spoken about how he had recently opened his eyes to the toxicity of the British Empire. He said his soul searching was prompted by the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the conversations the event sparked. At the time of receiving his OBE, Cumming had said in a statement, "I see this honour as encouragement to go on fighting for what I believe is right and for what I take for granted as a UK citizen. Thank you to the Queen and those who make up her birthday honours list for bringing attention to the inaction of the US government on this issue. It makes me very proud to be British and galvanised as an American." But recent debates around the monarchy have changed Cummings' mind about the role of the monarchy in the modern world, especially the way the British Empire profited at the expense and death of Indigenous peoples across the world. And that's a quote, by the way. Cumming now believes that the great good the award brought to the LGBTQ plus cause back in 2009 is now less potent than the misgivings I have being associated with the toxicity of empire. Recently, Welsh actor Michael Sheen returned his OBE, which he was awarded in 2009, after reading up on the Welsh history and his country's relationship with the British state. So, Linda, I've got a wee list that I compiled quickly
Oh,
of other celebrities who have given up their honours. Not all of them OBEs, some of them are MBEs, but it includes David Bowie, Paul Weller, Ken Loach, Alan Bennett, Jim Broadbent, Jon Snow, Benjamin Zephaniah, John Le Carre, French and Saunders, Roald Dahl, Nigella Lawson, Danny Boyle, Alfred Hitchcock, Stephen Hawking, and John Lennon. But
hmm.
so he's in good company. But my question to you was, do you think any of King Charles's behaviour that was caught on camera just after his mother's death, mostly to do with pens irritating him, do you think that kind of behaviour will have fed into Alan's decision?
Well, obviously, I don't know, but I wouldn't have thought so. I wouldn't have thought so. Um, no, I think it's just perhaps he's realised the sheer anachronism of having the British Empire as an award. And, you know, we all learn things as we go on through life. What you knew as a teenager, you learn differently through your 20s, and then in your 30s, you've read more, you learn more. I suspect that he's just become more knowledgeable over the last while. What is it? When did he get it? 2009? So you're talking, what, 13, 14 years? He's become a bit more knowledgeable that actually he's got the order of the British Empire. What the heck is the British Empire? Let's have a look. Oh dear. I mean, I've been reading a fascinating tome recently by an academic. I hope I'm not misquoting her name. I think it's Caroline Elkins. Um, about the British Empire and its effects in different countries across the world. I'm a huge fan of William Dalrymple since I discovered his books about India maybe 7 or 8 years ago. So that's been, even though I've known some of the stuff, that's been huge learning for me. So I think people grow, they learn things, and maybe get to the point they go, here, wait a minute, why am I accepting something in the name of what has been done here?
Yeah, and
Uh,
I
I
think
think it's
sometimes. Sorry, Linda.
no, no, I'm done. You carry on,
Just
Brian.
sometimes I think maybe when I see things, I think you're right. I think it probably just has matured a little bit. And but when you see things, there was that thing recently where the Queen was unwell and couldn't make it to the opening of Parliament in Westminster, so they took the crown, and it took her place, and it was driven down the Mall on a cushion in a car, and taken out the car and walked into the, and you're watching all that, and you're thinking, what on earth, and also just
It's
really.
nonsense.
It's ridiculous, and I remember having a discussion with a friend who had actually worked in the royal household, and he said
Ah,
that all of this, what it's called tradition, this pomp and circumstance, he said the only reason that it doesn't have to be still like that, and the only reason it is still like that is because the royal family like it that way. And until they change their mind, we're going to have to keep it. But anyway, I better, I better move on because I'm
oh, dearie
definitely
me.
late. So I
You know,
wonder,
I've never been offered an OBE or an MBE, Brian. I
no, me
wonder
neither.
why. Well,
We're better off without them, I think. Okay, so
yeah.
the next item. Um, Washington has raised concerns over the escalation in Israeli-Palestinian violence after Israeli forces killed 9 Palestinians during a raid on the West Bank yesterday, the deadliest single day in the territory in decades. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said he feared the security situation could worsen after 2 rockets were fired from Gaza early this morning, and Israel responded with airstrikes. Oh, excuse me. The top US diplomat is set to travel to the Middle East on Sunday to discuss the situation, with a visit planned to Egypt, Israel, and the West Bank. The trip was announced just hours after Israeli commandos killed 7 gunmen and 2 civilians in the occupied West Bank. A 61-year-old woman and a male civilian were among the dead, the Palestinian Health Ministry said, and about 20 more people were seriously injured. 2 of the casualties were claimed by the militant group Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another 4 by Hamas, and 1 by the armed wing of the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's Fatah group. The Palestinian Authority, which governs parts of the West Bank and works alongside Israel to contain military activity, announced on Thursday night that it was suspending security cooperation with the Israeli government, a step it has taken on a temporary basis in the past. Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, soldiers arrived at daybreak on Thursday at several entrances to the Jenin refugee camp in the north of the Palestinian territory, according to Sakir Kader, a Palestinian Dutch filmmaker who was at the scene. Shots were reported to have been fired at an Israeli armoured vehicle disguised as a commercial van, at which point the IDF returned fire and a fierce 4-hour gun battle ensued, causing widespread damage, Mr. Kader said. He said that he was stuck in the middle of the firefight for hours. It was crazy. There were snipers and drones, and they used a bulldozer to block off a street. It destroyed lots of cars and a public meeting spot, he said. So, Linda, I mean, this conflict has been going on for decades now. Um,
Yes, certainly has.
I don't know. I
I
mean,
mean, yeah, you used a term earlier, Brian, that sums up a lot of it for me. It was when you said the occupied West Bank. You know, it's the thing that it's a phrase that's just used just now, but the meaning behind that, the fact that the Israelis are actually occupying Palestinian land and have been for decades. And there's been UN resolutions against it. You know, people have railed against it for decades. They're still there, and they're encroaching further. In
using
fact,
force.
this newest government that's come in, if I remember rightly, part of it was actually on a ticket that they would force more settlements and take more land. Um, it's horrendous what's happening out there, and there's always been a wee bit of authority, a wee bit of cooperation with the Palestinians still in. Ugh, gosh, I'm doing what you're doing now, Brian. I'll need to have a drink of water too. Um, but now that even that cooperation's been suspended again, these people must be getting to the end of their tether. And we've also come out of a presidency in the US where Donald Trump was actually riling up feelings over in Palestine and actively promoting Israel against Palestine.
Yeah, he
I mean, I don't know
changed.
if it actually happened, but he talked about moving the US embassy right into Jerusalem. I
That's
don't know
exactly
if
what I
it's
was
happened.
going to say. Yeah, it did happen. Yeah, yeah, he did
Did it
do that.
actually happen?
Yeah.
So, you know, Western leaders have made it worse over the last few years. And Biden, I don't know if he'll pull back from some of that. He was expressing concern about violence escalating. But it probably will be as it always is, both sides have to stand back. Well, do you know what? One side is much better equipped than the other side. There is a level of aggression here in terms of land grabs, in terms of ignoring UN resolutions. And I'm really concerned now that the two-state solution that has been talked about for decades again, is more and more becoming something that Israel, or should I say Israel's government, because I know there are a lot of Israeli people within the country and outside the country that do not like what this right-wing Israeli government are doing. But they seem to be totally away from even considering a two-state solution now, and just keeping encroaching and taking more and more land. And then, of course, there's the way that the Palestinians are treated too, and the difficulty of living in these. I know the refugee camps have more or less turned into towns, but they're deprived areas. Life ain't easy
Mm.
in any of the Palestinian lands in that whole area.
Yeah, and if you think back to the previous item and when we were talking about the British Empire, and then of course the British has a
Uh-huh.
huge responsibility to and the way that things are there in that part of the world. But we'll move on to the next story. The chief of the Memphis police has warned that the video of officers beating Tyre Nichols is perhaps worse than the infamous footage of Rodney King being attacked by police in Los Angeles more than 30 years ago. The police department intends to release the video to the public this evening. In her first interview since 5 officers were charged with murder on Thursday, Police Chief Carolyn or CJ Davis told CNN that she was outraged after seeing the alarming video of the traffic stop of Nichols, aged 29, who died 3 days after a 7th of January apprehension spiralled into a fatal physical attack. Excuse me. So sorry.
You're in an awful state there, Ryan.
I've got a cough. I'm sorry. A bit bunged up. So Chief Davis said there appeared to be no legitimate reason for the traffic stop, and that she did not see any of the 5 officers intervene to stop excessive force by their fellow officers, saying they appeared to be in a state of groupthink as they confronted Mr. Nichols. So sorry, and became violent. Yeah, it's not right. Davis called for federal action to reform policing in the US, saying that the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act should be part of this. That legislation, which is named after the black man murdered by a white police officer. I'm so sorry, such an important story. That legislation, which is named after the black man murdered by a white police officer who kneeled on his neck in Minneapolis in 2020, sparking a national and international civil rights uprising, is currently stalled in the US Congress. President Biden has appealed for calm as the authorities prepare to release the body camera footage and other footage of the violent confrontation between the motorist and the officers. So yeah, sincere apologies about my spluttering through that really important story. But Linda, what do you make of the fact that this heinous crime is being linked already to the Rodney King killing and George Floyd?
Well, police brutality is police brutality. And they seem to have a big issue in the US with, institutional racism within the police force, but police brutality generally. Whether it's lack of proper training, whether it's lack of oversight, watching what people do, nipping things in the bud, and let's not think that the UK is blameless in this, nor indeed Scotland. I wouldn't say for a minute that everything is perfect in Police Scotland. But well, look at the Met, all it takes is people to get away with small things, and then it can escalate and escalate and escalate and turn a blind eye. And I think one of the horrible things about this story, and has been highlighted, and I'm pleased it's been highlighted so well, is not just the attacking of that poor lad, but that others stand aside and let it happen. I find that a really cold, hard thing to get my head round. That you would think it is acceptable that somebody would get battered, with no defence, by those who are supposed to uphold the law and protect people. And it's just about power. Power goes to people's heads sometimes. It's a bit of a cliche, put somebody in a uniform and they think they can get away with all sorts of things. And it is a bit of a power thing. It's about being the big guy, being in charge. I can do absolutely anything I like. And it seems to be an issue generally within police forces in the US. It's being said that this is going to be a turning point. I mean, this video must be awful when folk of note have come out so appalled by it even before it's out there in the public domain. This must be pretty grim. Will it be a turning point? And there's another issue about this, Brian, if you don't mind me going on. I've seen it said, but it was black police officers that attacked this black guy, so it's not racism. Okay, it's the power thing I talked about. But if it takes black police officers beating up a black man for there really to be a turning point about brutality and that kind of behaviour within a police force, there's something far wrong. Because this should have been getting dealt with long, long, long time ago. And if it's not as important if it's white police officers beating up a black man as it is when it's black police officers beating up a black man, well, there's something wrong generally in that way of thinking. So I hope it is a turning point for the sake of people generally in the US. But if it is, it should have happened a long, long, long time ago. It shouldn't have taken this.
Yeah, there's lots of clips online of him. He seems like he was a lovely a lovely fella, and he's lost his life now just because he jumped a traffic light. I mean, it's incredible. But anyway,
I think it's fascinating that it's been said by that. Is it the police? She's not the police chief, whatever it is, something over there, who's actually said that she can see no evidence of reckless driving.
yeah.
Awful.
So let's move on. Let's move on to the next story. A free independent advocacy service to support disabled people to access Scottish Government benefits has marked its first year in operation. The Scottish Government is investing more than £20 million to deliver this service over the course of 4 years. The independent service is available to people with a disability who may need extra support. This could include people with a sensory disability, mental health conditions, or learning disabilities. The service is also available to parents or carers who need support or access benefits for a child. I'll read that again. The service is also available to parents or carers who need support to access benefits for a child. The service, which was introduced in January 2022, enables disabled people to be more involved in the processes and decisions which affect them, and advocates will provide the most appropriate form of support to each individual based on their circumstances. Minister for Social Security, Ben McPherson, said, "I'm delighted that in its first year, the Independent Advocacy Service has supported over 550 people applying for Scottish Government social security benefits. The service is a key part of our human rights approach to social security and how the values of dignity, fairness and respect in our social security system work in practice." So, Linda, there's another 3 words that we can add to our lists tonight. It's dignity, fairness, and respect. What do you think of this item?
Well, I'm pleased. I'm pleased it's been carried on. For far too long, um, it's been really, really difficult for those with any kind of disability to access services in the same manner as those who are, fortunate enough to be able-bodied, for example. I'm particularly pleased, I have to say, about a bit of an emphasis on those with learning difficulties or learning disabilities, because I hope it ties in, yeah, access to benefits, but I hope it also ties in with potential access to work programs, because there's a lot of folk who are, not typical in their way of thinking, or being able to carry out the same jobs as many other people, um, who would actually be brilliant at some things. Might take a wee bit longer to be trained, might take a wee bit more care in the workplace, but are brilliant. And I've seen it so often myself. When I was elected, with some wonderful young people that ended up in jobs with really forward thinking and innovative companies that were willing to put in that wee bit extra. So I hope it's two-pronged. Yes, Ben McPherson's point of view is to help people access benefits and allow them to keep that dignity and respect be given to them. But there's another strand of it that should also feed into the bigger picture, which is about trying to access work as well. So, yeah, I would you'll give it a couple of years to see how all this pans out, and really let's see us, having folk that would be a great benefit to us all, uh, being able to really show us that, in fact, they are. So, yeah, good news.
Yeah, thank you for that, Linda. And the next item kind of chimes with it very nicely. So let's see what you think about this. Families across Scotland will benefit from a £1 million investment in charities specialising in mental health and wellbeing support in pregnancy and early years. The support provided by the Scottish Government's Perinatal and Infant Mental Health Fund will go to 34 charities that help new families take their first steps in raising babies and young children. It has been estimated that up to 20% of mums and up to 10% of dads are affected by poor mental health in the perinatal period. Between 10 and 22% of babies and young children also experience mental health difficulties. The fund enables organisations to provide one-to-one and group-based support and care that parents, carers and new babies need. Between October 2020 to March 2023, over £2.5 million has been distributed via the fund, and over 7,000 parents, expectant parents and infants have been supported by the funded organisations. Mental Wellbeing Minister Kevin Stewart announced extensions of the existing fund for another year from April 2023 to March 2024 at the current level of funding, over £1 million across the 12 months. Mr Stewart said, we want all mothers and their families to have access to good mental health care throughout pregnancy and during the postnatal period. The third sector plays a key role in access to perinatal and mental health support, and with the impacts of COVID-19 and the cost crisis, their work is more important now than ever. So, yeah, Linda, this was similar to the previous story, but yeah, I'll just ask, what do you think?
Yeah, well, it sounds good to me. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of studies carried out, even pre-pandemic, about, yeah, difficult time for parents, whether it be mothers, whether it be fathers, whoever. A difficult time when your whole life is changing through, having a child and then the early years. So yes, it's very much to be welcomed that there's going to be support there. Again, I would presume that I haven't looked closely at all the charities and groups that have been given the funding, but I'd presume they're, um, you know, organisations that have been doing work for a long, long time. It looks now it's getting tied in with mental health care for children as well. I haven't seen the detail of that, so that's a good thing, because one of the problems, Brian, that I've mentioned two problems that there's been over decades, is first of all the fact that public services are not always joined up. So you might get a pot of money here for a lassie who's pregnant and having a hard time. Then there's a pot of money somewhere else that can perhaps be accessed after she's had the bairn. And then if the child ends up with any kind of mental health problems, you have to go through another funding path. It seems to me that this government is trying very hard to join these things up and again see that bigger picture. And if that's starting to make a change in how things are done, well, that's all to the good. The other bugbear I used to have quite often was organisations, charities, groups have to bid for funds for things. So you would quite often get an organisation which had been doing brilliant work in an area for many years, doing something that really worked well, that then wouldn't get funding because they weren't doing anything new or innovative. And they were like, well, it works. We don't need to change it. Why change it if it works? So I hope that kind of thing is becoming a thing of the past as well. Sometimes the tried and true methods are the best. Sometimes those that have been doing it for a long time should just be allowed to keep on doing it. We shouldn't always be looking for the brand new project that people can get up and talk about as something new and wonderful. So I do think the government's getting to grips with that, and I think this is good. And again, all praise to the Scottish Government in this really hard time to be able to focus in on what must be priorities, which are young families, and really, really try and help. It's all part of the Child Poverty Action Plan as well, and surely no one could be upset about that.
Yeah, we're coming up to 8 o'clock, but the thing that struck me about this item is that it did seem to make sense that they're treating the family as a holistic group. It's like the mother, the father, and the child, and it's not just after pregnancy, but before, during, and after. So it does. I think you're right. That thing about joining the dots and kind of keeping it just seemed to make sense to me. I don't know if you'd.
It does to me, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I'm actually going to. I think it's a really interesting announcement. I think it was Kevin Stewart that made that announcement. So I'm going to look at it more closely, as I am with the one that was the previous item we discussed, because I really feel quite good about these initiatives, because it does seem to me as if it's a bit of a step change in how we do things. So I would like to look at it much more closely. Yeah.
And certainly I know that groups like Early Years Scotland, I mean, they do practical sessions where they teach parents baby massage and sensory play and things like that. So I don't know if that's going to be part of the mix, but well, that's all that we have for this evening. Linda, thank you for your time and your patience with me and my spluttering, and the same to
Oh,
people
we
at
feel
home.
right.
Oh, but it's been really good. So yes, thank you. That's it for this evening. But before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who's signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We've set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes for you. And you can see the address to the website there below. So again, just before I say goodnight, thank you once again, Linda. And that's all great. And tune in on Sunday for the full Scottish. Okay, thank you. Good night.